There is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So how do you master not knowing it all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that will lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of the comfort zone. Welcome to the conversation. Let's say you've just been promoted to lead the team, and this can be at any level in the organization, from the very top down to mid-levels. How are you going to manage the power and the pressure? How do you even think about those two? And more importantly, how are you going to manage up? What are the traps that you need to watch out for, and how do you make sure that you're avoiding them so that you can be the boss you want to be? So my guest today is Sabina Nawaz. She's an elite executive coach who advises C-level executives and teams at Fortune 500 corporations, as well as some government agencies and nonprofits and academics around the world. Dozens of keynotes, seminars, conferences each year, teaches at Northeastern, and Drexel universities, 14 years of tenure at Microsoft, and she went from managing software development teams to leading the company's executive development and succession planning for over 11,000 managers and nearly 1,000 executives, on occasion advising Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer directly. And she's written for every publication we can imagine you would want to be writing for in this business: Harvard Business Review, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Fast Company, and the list goes on. The book we're talking about is You're the Boss. Become the manager you want to be and others need. Sabina, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Wanda.
All right, I have to start at the top. What are you seeing managers get wrong today as they take that next step up in their journey?
Well, first of all, Wanda, they're getting a lot of things right. This book is not about how to get to the next step, but what do you do when you get there? They already know a lot and they're super successful. So this is targeted at people who are already successful and doing a great job. And it's important to take a beat and recognize that. It's also what they don't know. And there are three things that trip them up. First is that being promoted can be the riskiest time in your career. The second is that it is not power, but pressure that corrupts you. And thirdly, when that happens, when your response to pressure then shows up negatively to the people who work for you, the higher up you go, the more promoted you get, the less you know. In other words, power clouds over genuine feedback, so you won't know you're screwing up until it's too late.
All right. I don't disagree at all, but I'm curious that you say when you've just been promoted, regardless of the level, it's the riskiest time in your career. Why?
Because once we get promoted up the management chain, it's no longer about just what are our strengths and how do we shine in those strengths. It's how do those strengths get viewed from the other side of that power divide. Because the higher you go, the more there is a gap between you and others power-wise. So if, let's say, you're very calm, that may suddenly show up as disinterested. You're very strategic. Is this person a little manipulative? Of course, attention to detail becomes micromanaging. Whether or not you are those things is beside the point. That's how it's going to be seen. And because power creates this distance, it's hard for you to know that's how it's being seen. You're going to come in strong and hot, playing to those strengths and damaging the very things you're trying to achieve.
It's interesting. Certainly in my coaching, I see the same thing I'm sure you do in all of your coaching, is that people's intention is one thing, but how it's perceived through the organization is not necessarily aligned with that intention. And when you finally get an executive to get the feedback and pay attention to it and go, they're shocked. Like, people knew me for 20 years. How could they think that I'm being manipulative? They know better than that, or some other variations on the theme. So I think it's interesting that you say this power distance, the power gap, if you will, creates a different perception. different set of expectations, a different attribution of reasons all along. Okay? So power gaps. All right. So that's one, you say. So getting promoted is the riskiest because people are going to perceive you differently. But then you say pressure corrupts, not power. How? Explain that one.
It's the higher you go, the more pressure you are under. I, everybody is under tremendous pressure these days. And then multiply that manyfold as you get promoted. All our best intentions aside, we forget those because we're under the gun. And we buckle down, we compartmentalize, we get narrow in our view, we have the task right in front of our nose, and that's what we want to work on. All of those things get in the way of then noticing what's going on around us. How are people taking what I'm saying? Are they clear? How does it land on them? Have I taken a moment to connect with them? We go, that'll happen in time. I mean, this happened to me personally. I saw that. And guess what? It was a complete shock to me when I learned, as it is to our clients when they get that feedback.
I can't tell you how many times I've done feedback to people when you tell them the name that somebody has nicknamed them in the halls, and they're just like, what? How did that happen? Yeah, I think one of the hardest things, particularly the higher you go in the organization, is to get out of the task execute mode. The do, drive, deliver results, make everybody happy, above you happy, to get out of that mode and recognize that you have to spend more time with people, talking to people, thinking with people, telling people how you're thinking. And it just feels like that is wasted time when you're so focused on the task. You're nodding your head, so you must have a similar experience.
Absolutely. I cannot tell you the number of people who do that. One person in particular, I can give you the example of, let's call her Jane. And Jane thought connecting with people is a complete waste of time. We're here to do work. Business is business. This is not personal, which is a myth, and a myth that I bust right away in the book. And realizing that people were not actually, they were dialing it in. They were not putting in the effort that she wanted. They were not excited about the vision that she was so excited about. She was so excited, she was full steam ahead and didn't spend the time to look and see, are you with me? Are you just as excited? Because she would barrel into a meeting, rattle off the task that needed to be done, not set even context, let alone check in and see what ideas other people had. Now, she was very, very visionary and had really great ideas, and she was right most of the time. And that's why this book is for successful people. It is for people who are right most of the time, who do have great ideas. But your ideas cannot exist in a vacuum. You need an entire village to carry that with you.
Right, right. So it's where's that village, and what does it take for that village to buy in to you and to your vision? I find too many times that people are focused on, well, they'll get to know me with time. They'll see how hard I work. They'll know that my vision and strategy and assessment is correct. And that is what will create followership, all right? And maybe at one point in the career, early in the career, that does the case. But eventually, when you're trying to get other people around you to follow you, to amplify the execution, man, it takes a lot more than that.
It sure does.
Okay. All right. So we said when you're promoted, it's the riskiest time in your career. We said that power corrupts, or pressure corrupts, and not power. That it's the power gaps, the distances between your level of power and the organization's level of power, that people stop interpreting you with the intentions you thought. And then lastly, you said that the pressure shows up negatively, the power clouds over. Explain.
The more pressure you have, the more you're going to act out, most likely, not your best self. And especially because you're not your best self, who in their right mind, where there is a power gap, where you have say over their livelihood, is going to say, you really screwed up over there, boss or boss's boss? They're not. The day you get promoted to manager is when you stop hearing the full truth. The higher you go up, the more of the filter, the less you know. So let's take that for granted. And how does that work from a mindset perspective when you're used to being the person who knows the most? Really difficult. I have one client, Adam, and he is brilliant and was doing amazing work, but got called into his boss's office to say, here's where you're screwing up. No one wants to work for you anymore. Go fix this or you don't have a job. And here he thought he was going in for a promotion. Adam was what I would call an innocent saboteur, where he thought he was succeeding because of these traits under pressure. He was making jokes, he thought, to lighten the mood, but it was actually really demoralizing for people because he was talking down to them. He was using sarcasm to motivate people. So there were all these things he was doing with the best intent, but they were backfiring. And then because of that power gap, no one was telling him.
Right. I don't know a CEO who doesn't talk about how hard it is to know what's actually going on, that people stop telling you the truth. And in fact, I know CEOs and very senior executives who make it a habit of reaching multiple steps below into the organization, way down, where someone has no skin in the game to not tell you. And he said, that's the only way I know what's going on in the organization. I probably spend, a day, a month just talking to people who are much junior than I am, because then I know what's really working and what's really not working, what messages are getting through. All right. I have to go back to one other thing you said. Business is not personal, you said. That's the biggest myth and one you bust straight out. So tell us this myth. Business is personal after all?
It is, after all, personal because we are not just thinking beings. We're not Data on Star Trek. We have emotions and we make decisions based on our emotions and use our logic to justify those decisions. One example is this person who headed up an organization that got acquired by another organization. And his strategy was to tell people, don't worry. And I thought I told him that would be the exact wrong thing for you to do. Because the minute you tell someone not to do something, they're going to wonder why. Oh, I wasn't worried before, but maybe I should be. Oh, why is he saying don't worry? What's coming up next? Reorgs? We're going to be sitting ducks. I better put out my resume right now. So first of all, that causes more reassurance, causes more anxiety than less. And then secondly, people will feel what they feel. You cannot really control that. So instead, he worked on then naming some emotions and putting them on the table. Now he did not look like this clueless person who was just trying to do toxic positivity and had a bead on what people might be going through. So he said things like, I understand. This might be worrying. This might be concerning. Some of you might be worried about your jobs. Some others might be worried about your research. Some of you are confused about roles and responsibilities. Let's talk about that.
Okay. So actually naming the emotion that's going on, not in a way of, I know you are feeling, but I can imagine you might be feeling. Some of you might be thinking this, but naming it so that, and people responded positively to that. They saw that was a good sign.
They felt seen and heard and understood.
Okay. I say this to people all the time. I mean, half, not all, but half of this emotional intelligence piece is to be able to name the emotion that I'm experiencing and that ask about the emotion you're experiencing. So I can't name it for you, but I can at least acknowledge it or recognize that it might be there. And there you go. All right, power gaps and pressure pitfalls. All right, so we've talked about power gaps in terms of the gap between the level you have of hierarchical power and the level some other people in the organization have. What do you mean by pressure pitfalls?
Pressure pitfalls are the traps that we fall into under pressure and the ways in which we generate pressure on ourselves. Look, most of the pressures are coming from outside, and many of those we don't have any control over. So success is not being pressure free. It's about being pressure proof. How do you get on top of those things? And it's not about getting a personality transplant. It's not about going on a 3-week retreat. It's about applying some simple tools that can turn that pressure tide around.
So such as, what kind of tools do you apply?
Well, there are several. One of them is the time portfolio. The time portfolio. So we all say time is our most precious resource. And then we go down the rabbit hole on TikTok. So how do we become more strategic about the time we're spending? One way is to treat time, our most precious resource, just like you would manage any other resource, as a portfolio. Look at the big chunks of time you are spending on things at work, identify those, write down roughly the relative percentage of time you're spending on each. By the way, many of my clients end up with more than 100%. So, when we're talking percentages, it needs to add up to 100. Now think about, so one of my clients, for example, she was spending about 25% of her time in emails, Slack channels, Teams messages, communications. Did not want to do that. She wanted that to go down to about 15%. So the next bucket is what's your aspired percentages, again, adding up to 100. And then the second mistake would be to try to go from 25 to 15 overnight. So create an intermediate space. So let's say I'm going from 25 to 23 in the next 6 months. And what's one action I'm going to take to change that? I might turn off notifications. I might work offline from time to time. So those would be some concrete actions, as opposed to saying, oh, I'm just going to do less email. Tie it to smaller, realistic goals with a specific action.
Right. Yes, I don't know anybody. I can't seem to start a conversation with anybody at any level, in any organization, in any country in the world, where whatever the topic becomes, it turns immediately to the pressure people are feeling and how to get on top of the calendar, the demand, because it's the demands. It's the constant changes, the demands on time, the fear that I'm going to miss out on something if I don't do da-da-da-da-da. There's just enormous pressure there. And we can talk about time and time management for forever, but the only one who's going to control it is you. So you've got to figure out how to deal with that and how to not let that pressure get under your skin. Because once you let it get under your skin, that's when all these negative behaviors start to come out, whether you're aware of it or not aware of it. So fair enough. All right. I want to talk then. I want to shift for a minute. We can come back to this one too as well. But I want to shift for a minute to talk about this whole notion of managing up. Because in the pressure pits of the world, what I hear from most people is, yes, but my boss. But my boss is demanding. My boss wants an immediate answer. My boss wants me to respond to email or to Slack or to whatever instantaneously, or my boss's boss. And the pressure often comes from this need to manage up. So how do you get people to think about managing up?
So true, Wanda. So much pressure comes from managing up. And at least half of that are stories that we've made up in our own heads. Have we taken the time? We assume when a manager says, when can you get this to me? Maybe the manager is intending to empower you and say, take the time you need, tell me a reasonable time frame. But you might interpret that as, there goes my weekend, I've got to do this. So are you actually clear about the facts as opposed to the interpretations or assumptions you have made? Asking your boss, use numbers. On a scale of 1 to 10, how urgent is this? On a scale of 1 to 10, how important is this? Things like that. By when would you like this? Most people are surprised when they ask the by when would you like this question, that the timeline is almost always longer than they thought. But also it helps when it isn't longer than they thought. They know which ones are truly urgent rather than making everything a crisis. So instead of making up stories in your head about, I need this immediately, this is most important, drop everything else, first check and ask that question.
Right. Okay. True for customers too, by the way.
Absolutely.
Frequently, we assume customers wanted it yesterday, and it's not necessarily the case. So,
Absolutely.
okay. All right. So I'm going to ask, I'm going to stop and ask, how important is this? Is this more urgent than anything else? When do you need this by? One of my favorite questions to ask, Sabina, is how accurate do you need it?
Nice.
Because sometimes managers just want an approximation
Yes.
and they don't really know how much effort it takes to get 100% accuracy. And so, like, can you give me an approximation in an hour, or are you going to spend 24 hours giving me the details? Oh, I don't need the details. But that accuracy trade-off. So do you find that as well, or do you have other
Absolutely. I
tips?
think that's brilliant because there's so much desire to be perfect as well and all buttoned up. Whereas they may not be asking for that. They want a rough order of magnitude or a first draft of something. Just give me a few blobs, not the full animated bells and whistles slide.
Yeah. I see that a lot. And then you produce something and it wasn't exactly what the manager was looking for. And you spent all this time making it look really pretty,
Right.
when a conversation that said, do we have the right three buckets here? Yes, no. Okay, I'll go correct it from there. Would have saved enormous amounts of time. Are any other tips for managing up?
Oh gosh, there's so many, Wanda.
Okay, let's
Uh,
go.
Another one is the tool called multiple meanings. And this is again where we make up stories about what our boss is thinking of us. Often a little twitch on their eyebrow we take personally and we make much worse than what it actually is. And then we spend a lot of time worried. Mm. One example, somebody's manager told her, I think there's an opportunity for you to have more impact. She spent an entire week stewing on this, didn't do anything else, very worried. Oh my gosh, I'm not making enough of an impact. Is my job at stake? I suck. All these stories that she made up. Finally, she actually went, speaking of numbers, and asked her boss, hey, when you say more impact, are you talking about 90% more impact? Or are you talking about 5% more impact? Her manager was shocked. He's like, of course I mean 5%. You're killing it. You're doing a great job. Well, she didn't know that. So instead of, when you make up those stories that are all doom and gloom, see if you can make up two other stories next to it. So instead of simply saying, oh, he thinks I don't have enough impact, that's one story. And you know what? It's human nature. I can't say don't make up that story. You will. But you can make up a couple more. Another might be, he's really a mentor of mine and wants me to succeed, and he's looking to put like that cherry on top. That could be a second story. What's a third story you can make up about that comment? He wants to give me more responsibility. He's thinking of me as his successor. Wow, that will give me a lot more breathing room than, wow, I mustn't be making any impact whatsoever.
Yeah, I love that. I can't tell you how many times we see this. I know you see it all the time. And it doesn't matter seniority. We do this everywhere. This assume the worst possible interpretation without stopping to think what are the other interpretations.
Exactly, exactly. So anytime you find yourself making a dire prediction, pop up two other stories. That's
Okay.
multiple meanings in action.
And multiple meanings in action. I like that. Okay, so we have time portfolio kind of management. Where am I spending my time? How am I spending my time? What's important in my time? I have asked my manager what they really need, really want, how urgently. I have I've forgotten your acronym now for your name for this one, but in effect, checking the multiple meanings, making sure I've generated multiple meanings. What else can I do to manage up?
Hmm. The, there is a tool called mapping, and this is about explaining to others. It goes hand in hand with multiple meanings, is explaining to others how you like to work in plain English. So, with your manager, perhaps saying, hey, when I present an idea and I see you look off sideways over there, or I see you get a frown on your face, what does that mean? Is that your thinking face? Is frowning your thinking face? So, one, you can assure yourself there, but you can also create a map for yourself. So, for example, you could tell your manager, I prefer to do things in increments. instead of giving you a full product at the end, is it okay if we set up 2 checkpoints? Because then I can get your feedback and incorporate this along the way. So that's my preference. Can we do it this way? Here's the action I'm requesting. What else is your preference? You might say, this was something somebody said, they had a learning difficulty. It was hard for them to process a big long email. And the manager used to overnight send them 10 things in one email. And his request was, will you please send me, break it down, or know that it takes me a long time to process a big chunk of text. So I might do that sequentially back to you. I may not be able to get you a whole chunk back. So what are your preferences in terms of your physical affect, your work preferences, whether you like humor or not, whether you do chit chat or not, and what are your managers? Getting clear on the mapping of both of you can be a tremendous help in not making up those dire stories and also greasing the wheels of efficiency as you work with each other.
Right, right. I don't know why more people don't do this, Sabina. Okay, so you might not do it you might do it day one, but at least a couple months in with a manager, you should sit down and evaluate. I have been doing X, Y, and Z. Is that what you like, or do you like something else? Or, hey, I noticed you've been doing this. I work much better if you could. Your manager may say no, but at least you kind of have the conversation and you know what you're doing, whether it's working or not.
Yes. Your manager wants you to do your best possible work.
Yeah, no manager wants to sabotage you. Right.
Right?
Sabotaging themselves if they're sabotaging you. That makes no sense to me. How many times have we heard that story? Okay, so let's talk about the one that scares most people to death, Sabina. And that is when I have to tell a manager no. I have to say I can't do it, or I can't get that to you on the timeline I thought, or the answer is not as good as you thought it was, or I have bad news for you. Any version of you're not going to like what I'm about to tell you. How do you get through those moments? Because those are the ones everybody avoids telling, and that creates that power gap, once again, that we talked about at the very beginning. So how do you deal with that?
That's Wanda, you already did one of those, which is actually prefacing what you're about to say with saying, this is going to be tough, because then the manager is a little bit more prepared to receive the bad news. The other one is to let go of the saying, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. If you wait a long time, if you buy into that school of thought and you wait a long time to come up with the solution, first, you may not be the right person to provide the solution. Second, that may not be the solution that's needed. It's better to provide the bad news as early as possible before it becomes headlines. And either say, I've got this, I'm working on it, but I want you to have a heads up, or I want to reset expectations, or this might be worth brainstorming with the broader team, all of us together, but because I wanted you to have the news first, I'll take accountability, I'll take ownership. So this is not about complaining, but raising early feedback.
Flags. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I've talked to lots of senior leaders who say, I don't want you to come with a fully baked solution because the chances are that you will have a full picture are very limited. But I do need to know that you've come and thought about something.
Absolutely.
So I want you to tell me as soon as possible, and then I want that to be followed by, here's what I considered. And that doesn't have to be the answer. It doesn't have to be the final solution. It's just I need to know you're thinking about something. You haven't just said, oh, here's a disaster. Oh, wait, let me to tell my manager. So we assume that means go fix it and then tell me you fixed it. It doesn't. Frequently, managers want to help with those solutions.
Correct. Exactly.
Yeah. And what's the adage that we hear so often anymore? I'm not going to fire you for telling me bad news. I'll fire you from withholding bad news.
Yes. Great.
Indeed. Okay. But that just takes courage, Sabina, doesn't it? Is there anything beyond? I mean, it helps if I have a good relationship with my manager and I've delivered already for sure. But isn't it just come down to courage?
Courage and actually some tactics as well. So if you were to do that mapping exercise that we just talked about, you could actually discuss, how does each of us like to deliver and receive bad news? Do you want an early heads up? How early is the heads up? How do you want me to pick up the phone and talk to you? Do you want me to send you a message? How do we do that? So that you could create a standard operating procedure, if you will, before the crisis hits. And then it's much easier. It doesn't become such big a deal because you've got a process in place.
It's a really smart strategy to think to take the time to say, look, stuff is going to go wrong. When it goes wrong, how do you want to have the information? How fast do you want the information? What's your preferred format about hearing it? What do you want me to do first, second, and third? I mean, like, just what's your expectations on these moments? And at least that takes away some of my fear that I got half of it wrong.
Exactly.
Okay. I know if it's an email or to the chief of staff or to the whatever. All right. Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. I want to come back for a moment on the power gaps. And because this is a longstanding fascination of mine, this notion of power. Clearly, there's power in the hierarchy. No question about that. Because as I go on the hierarchy, I have authority to make decisions that I don't have lower down in the hierarchy. And that's hiring and firing decisions and budget decisions and investment decisions and, a range of decisions. Okay? But there's also limited power in many ways. The higher you are, the less able you are to actually touch and do anything. You're counting on other people to bring you information to execute. So how do you think about power and where power comes from, other than just the hierarchy?
What a beautiful question, Wanda. I remember this time when I was managing a test organization in software, and there was this employee who wasn't performing up to par and was working on something critical. A lot of people were dependent on that deliverable, and it was right up to the wire. And I remember feeling so incredibly helpless, even though I was the manager, because this person was missing in action in every sense of the word. So you're right, power can be defined in many different ways. And power comes from many different sources. So for sure, there's hierarchical power, but there's also the power of our voices. How do we give voice to things? And a lot of that comes from connecting with our peers. By the way, one of the sure signs that you will not get promoted above your peers is if your peers never want to work for you. So we often look at things up and down and not sideways, and building great relationships with our peers is really important. There was an example of an organization where the CEO was going in the wrong strategic direction, and a couple of people recognized that this was not going to fly, but the CEO was really in love with that strategy. They got together 8 peers. One of them happened to be going into a review with the CEO the next week. They hijacked that meeting and said, 8 of us have shown up because we're not going to have this meeting. We're going to have this other conversation. All 8 of us believe in this vulnerability and this pivot that needs to happen. Guess what? The CEO heard them. If that person had gone individually, they might have gotten fired or certainly ignored. Maybe they would have gotten listened to, but this really amplified the effect of, hey, 8 smart people are thinking that, surely I need to pay attention to this.
Right. Keep going.
So there's power of your voice. There's knowledge or information power, expertise. When we are expert in something, people are going to come to us. They're going to give us a lot of credence. And it's important, the more expert you get, to also remain open to multiple meanings, that there might be other possible explanations for what might be going on. There is connection power, influence power. Those people on a team where everybody goes, talks to them, even though they don't have that title, and they are the glue that connects everybody. So there's many ways to slice and dice power.
Right. I think in my experience, I've seen a lot of power moves like you described with the 8 individuals challenging the CEO in the CEO's direction. I've seen that with 3. I've seen that with 5. I've seen it with always more than 3 because it's kind of hard to pull that off without at least 3 people. But it starts with 3 people who have a strong connection with each other and to take the risk to say, what am I thinking? What are you seeing? Are we on the same page? Are we not on the same page? Here's what I'm worried about. Like those 8 had to open that conversation, which means they had to have some trust with each other. And that's the power of the connections.
Absolutely. And that doesn't get built overnight. So on day 1 of your job, starting to build relationships with your peers, just as you're building relationships with your team or your boss.
Yep. Well, something I think most people miss, because ultimately, as one of my favorite leaders says, you're not a leader unless your peers want to follow you, because you can't get anything done without your peers coming along. Okay, so there's the power in the hierarchy. There's the power of my voice, particularly when I combine it with the voices of others. There's the power of the knowledge and expertise, so long as I don't get so wedded to a single interpretation. There's the power of connection and influence, the person who's the glue. Are there any other sources of power you think matter?
Well, there's of course coercive power, where we might overuse our hierarchy or other means to get people to fall in line out of fear, as opposed to out of love, if you will. Um, so that is a source of power as well.
Yeah, and do you see that? I mean, I always believe that backfires when I use coercive power. What's your experience, though?
Yeah, I think it depends on what you want done. If you need somebody to just simply go from point A to point B stat and ask no questions and get it done because it's a life or death situation, for example, you might have to use that. But you've got to use it with huge caution, because that's not something that long term will serve you. People will vote with their feet.
Yeah, I do see that in a crisis. Many people just want to say, tell me which direction to go and how fast and how hard, and I'll go. But we don't have time to debate about it, so just tell me. All right, fair enough. Okay, last thing I want to cover with you is your 7 communication fault lines. What are those and how do we avoid them?
Yeah. Communication fault lines open up because, first of all, there's this natural power distance. So people will make up stories about what you intend, what you're saying. And this is the second most common area of feedback people give me when I interview them about what their bosses are actually like to work for. It's around communication. It's the longest chapter in the book because it is so very important. A few of these, one is this notion of uneven feedback, that we tend to, as bosses, only give the corrective feedback, not the positive feedback. And research shows, at least in couples research, for example, that the ratio of positive to corrective has to be 5-1 for someone to perceive it as 1-1. I'm guessing it's similar when it comes to a boss and an employee. And this doesn't mean being fake or hollow praise like good job, but really, are you spending time noticing what they're doing well? And the reason that's important is when I know exactly what I'm doing well, I can replicate that formula and do great. I can keep going, but there's a lot of them. So, that's
Yeah,
just,
I'd love to hear more of them, but you're right. We do always zero in on, for some reason, what's wrong as a manager, as opposed to what's right. Because the single highest motivator, the biggest inspiration you can get for somebody, is to tell them what they're doing right, because they will double down on that. And if that's the behavior you want, double down on it is like, that is a really good thing. So Stephen Covey says, if you want to motivate people, you want to inspire people, catch them doing something right. I love that phrase, catch them doing something right. So I agree with you. And I am the world's worst at actually implementing it, just for the record. You can ask any of my staff ever. They will say, yes, that's true. All right. So
and Wanda,
uneven feedback.
that's something you can address by adopting a little micro habit. At the end of every day, putting a note on your calendar to say, can I reflect on the day and send a genuine piece of positive feedback to somebody today? It can be something really minor, but that habituates it.
Right, right. I know many people who would go every day, no way. Okay, but at least once or twice a week would be a really good formula.
And that's fine. If you do it every day, if you at least ask yourself that every day, you will start to get more in the habit of catching people doing something right.
Right, right. We way underestimate how much people need it and how frequently they need it. Okay, so uneven feedback is one fault line. What's the second one?
Another one, my favorite, is the past experience divide, which is well, back in my day, or in this other group that we were in, or in this other organization that I was in. When I meet an executive who has just been hired into a new organization, I often talk to them about the kiss of death is to refer to your past organization. It's about as appealing as talking about your ex on a first date. So you really want to, of course, you're going to bring in that experience. That's why you were hired. You just don't have to rub people's noses in them, first of all. Second, maybe get a little curious because maybe these people have already done those things as well. So why don't you start by asking and finding out what they're doing?
Yeah, fair enough. Oh, boy, we see that one a lot. Okay, just because I can't resist, give me one more of the fault lines.
I ask people, this is about unspoken messaging. As we all know, I'm sure you see this in your work a lot, Wanda. We transmit so much information that's not spoken. And I counsel my clients to arrange their faces before they start any conversation. What is the tone and affect that you intend to communicate in this meeting? If you're really disturbed about something and you want people to wake up and pay attention and address a challenge, don't go in smiling. If you really want to look for what they have done well and you're frowning the whole time on the other side, that's not right either. So pay attention to what your face is transmitting because believe me, everybody has their eyes on your face.
Absolutely. And interpreting it, as you said earlier, whether you meant it that way or not at all. I will tell you, the fastest way to learn to adjust your face is to do a recorded podcast where the entire world sees how you look on a Zoom screen or other screen for an hour. And then you know, okay, I've got some correction here to make. It's a great way to know it. All right, Sabina, much more to talk about. I think there's so many tips in this one. One of the things that I really like is recognizing the pressure pitfalls, because the higher you go, the more the pressure and the power gaps. So that the higher you go, the more distance there is between you and the people below you and the organization as a whole, because there's many people below you. And recognizing how much those can get in your way of getting information, of getting people to understand what you're thinking, why you're really thinking it, of you bringing out your worst side of yourself as opposed to your best side of yourself, and so on. And then these tactics for managing up, for some simple tactics for managing up, as well as recognizing where the communication really falls apart. So what a great conversation.
Wow. Yes. Very enjoyable. And I loved hearing your examples and stories as well as you've coached people all over the globe.
Thank you. Yes, we have a lot in common in terms of what we've seen. But at any rate, I like how you framed all of this. Sabina Nawaz, the book is You're the Boss, Becoming the Manager You Want to Be and Others Need. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you for joining us today. Tune in for another edition next week with Dr. Wanda Wallace on the Voice America Business Channel. Reach outside your comfort zone this week.